Hello, everyone. Dr. Stillman here with Clark Engelbert. We are here today to talk about hair tissue mineral analysis and specifically announce that we are collaborating right now on an HTMA hair tissue mineral analysis, for those of you not in the know, course, which is going to be coming out at the end of July. There will be a webinar for that. You will really get a lot out of it. We are going to talk about secrets of hair tissue mineral analysis, which both he's been doing HTMA analysis for a lot longer than I have. But I've dipped into it over the years and have been doing more and more of it recently, and have been very impressed by some of the things I'm able to discover about people from hair tissue mineral analysis that has evaded other elements of what I do, which is part of what we wanted to talk about today, which is, namely that I think there's a really strong argument to be made that the best place to measure minerals is in the hair.
Yeah, could not agree more, Dr. Stillman. And yeah, not only is the hair analysis a biopsy test, so we're getting a reading of the minerals in the cells, but it's a longer term type of test as well. And that's due to the nature of hair growth, right? So not only we're getting a reading of the minerals inside the cells, but we're getting a reading of the deposition of those minerals into the cells of the hair over about a 3 to 4 month period, which is very different than a lot of blood testing and other conventional medical tests that are out there today.
Right. And so I started to do hair tissue mineral analysis with blood minerals. And in most of the functional medicine world, people are looking at blood minerals in some way. Some of them are doing provoked or unprovoked heavy metal urine screening. And there's so much noise in the data that they're getting that it's very questionable. I've seen people have very low copper levels who then had a high copper level in the hair. I've seen people with low zinc levels have high or low zinc levels in the hair. I've just seen them be all over the place. And I think that the reason that the functional medicine world doesn't want to do hair tissue mineral analysis is that it's such a sophisticated test that you really have to spend a lot of time studying it and thinking about it if you're ever going to interpret it with any kind of reliability. And I would say even then, the reality is that minerals are so powerful that pushing minerals into the body, you can have some really intense, what I would describe as healing reactions. And, I'm convinced that, I just see that the reality is that when you balance people's minerals in their body, they feel so much better. And when we look at long-term outcomes, and I'm not talking about epidemiological studies, I'm not talking about, meta-analyses or big fancy academic type stuff. I'm talking about the patients who do the best. The biggest thing that moves is their minerals. I could say their hormones move along with it, but at the end of the day, what we talk about in this course extensively, much more extensively than we can talk about today, is that what we see happening with minerals and with hormones is that the hormones will determine what minerals get laid down in the hair. And then the minerals in turn will determine what hormones get made. And so if you don't understand a lot of both endocrinology and then mineral biology, you'll make mistakes. And a lot of the stuff that you'll find in the hair tissue mineral analysis world isn't in a biochemistry or physiology textbook. The physiologists would say, how do you know that? Or what on earth are you talking about? But what matters here is clinical results, which is what we're all about.
Right, exactly. And I think you make a really important point, which is that the hair analysis is a very sophisticated test. And I think the framework through which we view this test is skewed in a lot of the alternative health space, and especially in medicine. But the hair test is, while it's a biopsy test, it's measuring minerals over the long term, it's also measuring the entire mineral system all at one time. And
this is unbelievable value, because what I've seen is that, and I've done hundreds of mineral panels with the Nutritive, and so that's copper, magnesium, potassium, zinc, and selenium for the nutritive minerals. And then it's cadmium, mercury, lead, and arsenic for the toxic elements. But that's less than half of the analytes on the hair tissue mineral analysis test that we use.
Exactly. And I think maybe the biggest thing for people to understand when it comes to looking at this test and their practitioner like using it, you have to understand it through the lens of the mineral system.
Yes.
This is the work of Dr. Paul Eck going back to like the 70s and 80s. And there's a newer field that's cropped up in the last like 10 or 15 years looking at this formally in the literature. It's called Ionomics. But basically what Eck was getting at back in the 70s and 80s and what Ionomics is getting at more recently is how exactly do all of these elements interact with each other? And it is oftentimes more important to understand those interactions than it is individual mineral levels and whether or not one mineral level is high or low. So the interactions and the whole system sort of predominate. And if you want to get huge results clinically, our approach is to balance the whole system of minerals. And this is what we mean when we say mineral balancing. There's a lot of people, I think, using that term out there who, I don't know if they necessarily know what that means, but to you and I, it means balancing the whole system all at one time when there are multiple imbalances in that system. And you can really, so that the implication of that is that you cannot balance the whole system without understanding how all those elements interact with each other.
Right. And all of the elements interact with, I don't know if I should say all, but these interactions, some of them are more significant than others. The nutritional elements, like minerals that your body uses as nourishment to accomplish certain tasks, to run certain enzyme systems, those minerals will interact with other nutritive minerals. They'll interact with the toxic elements. And all of that leads to just a lot of, the part of why I started to do this was that I was getting data on people's diets, and I was seeing what their mineral load was. And it started to occur to me or become apparent to me that people have no idea what they're eating as far as their actual mineral load. And that if you correct some of those underlying mineral deficiencies in their diet, they get radically better. Then if you pair that with looking at the actual numbers in their hair, you can make conclusions about not only the load, but what's being absorbed, how it's being metabolized, what the body's doing with it in terms of its hormone systems, which makes it one of the most pound for pound valuable tests that we run now.
Yeah, absolutely. And to your point on the heavy metals aspect of all of this, we are measuring the metals as well using the hair test, which is a huge value because of that longer term nature to it. Whereas in provoked challenge test, you're really only getting about 24 to 48 hours worth of data. So,
right.
Another
thing I'm wary of with the provoked challenges is that, for many people, there's so many options for detox with heavy metals. Technically you can run around and you can get some penicillamine, you can use high dose vitamin C, you can use binders, you can use clays and charcoals and all kinds of things. And then you can get really fancy and do things like IV chelation. But the reality is that many people do not need all the expense, hassle, and sometimes adverse events from these things, which I have to admit are generally speaking well tolerated. But you don't necessarily need all of them. Oftentimes what you actually need is the nutritive minerals to help correct the heavy metal load. And you don't have to do these complicated urine challenge tests. And you'll also see that people who are testing on a single day or even around a 24-hour cycle, it's very, very temperamental in terms of what you've eaten that day or what you've eaten in the last multiple days.
Exactly.
And with the hair, you're not running into that problem. You have a very stable, consistent number, or rather measurement of what's coming out of the body.
Yeah, exactly. But I think your point that you're making in terms of metal detoxification is we could explain a little more in depth. Not only do the minerals all interact with each other, but a huge piece that I think that people don't understand as well is that metals interact with the minerals in that larger mineral system or in what is called an ionome. And so basically, to really understand how metal toxicity occurs in the first place is to understand how to detoxify those metals. And what you're hinting at with respect to the minerals and the metals is that metals gain access to cellular compartments in the first place through mineral channels and transporters, through this process called ionic mimicry. And that's how metals gain access to cells. There's two phases of ionic mimicry. The second phase is that the metals actually substitute on enzymes and proteins where the minerals normally should be and are charged with carrying out different functions.
Right.
So part of the reason why chelation sometimes cannot work for people is because those toxic elements are substituting for the nutritive minerals on enzymes and proteins that the minerals are normally supposed to work on. If you just rip the metals out, then it can leave nothing for some enzymes and proteins to run.
Right.
So,
yeah. And that's the thing is that, and that really becomes apparent in doing people's labs. If you don't know what minerals they actually need and you just blindly supplement, you may have some good outcomes, but you can either create imbalances,
exactly,
or you don't get the patient faster results that you could be getting if you bothered to measure.
Exactly.
Because people are so different. And sometimes you'll catch things on the HTMA that are so interesting. Like I've seen very high chromium levels. I've seen very high manganese levels. I've seen very high copper levels. You can be catching someone's exposure in their home, their work, just their environment in general to something really significant. And sometimes what's interesting about that is that it often is the thing that convinces them to change because they see the number and they know it's bad. So for example, the aluminum tests that I've had back that were over 100, people were they were like, wow, oh my gosh, my diet soda or actually it hasn't been diet soda, but my energy drink habit really needs to stop. I need to come up with something better for my body. Otherwise, who knows what this aluminum is going to do to me long term.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So in terms of the metal detoxification and the mineral balancing component, how those things relate, I think it's really important for people to know that through mineral balancing, we're able to achieve heavy metal detoxification. And you can kind of think of this conceptually as mineral balancing is reverse engineering the total set of mineral imbalances that you've had throughout your life, which led to the heavy metal bioaccumulation in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
So understanding how ionic mimicry works and how the metals substitute for the minerals where they become lower biounavailable ties together the hair test, why we use it, and then how we actually use it and what we're trying to achieve with it at the same time, which is metal detoxification is the result of mineral balancing. If you're on a mineral balancing program, you don't necessarily really need to do any sort of other fancy detoxification protocols. It is the detoxification protocol that works the best I've ever seen of any other modality out there.
Right. And I think that people, don't realize that, just to make this point very, very clear, if you don't have the mineral that's supposed to be in the place the toxic element is, mm-hmm. How is your body supposed to get rid of that toxic element? It doesn't work well. So that's why when you're balancing people's minerals, you'll see new things come out of tissue. Doesn't mean that they have a new exposure to one of these things. It means rather that they're pushing something out. When I did blood testing, I would see this regularly. And, people were getting better as we did, one round of lab testing after another. And that's why, and the other thing about it is it's not just minerals, like there's other components of these systems, but the minerals underlie it all, or rather are underpinning everything.
Yeah. That I think is another really important point, sort of hinting at the importance of minerals. There's a lot of people out there that are kind of hinting at this and talking about this in a vague sort of manner.
Yes.
But I think we can make it a little more tangible in that minerals are really at the foundation of your biochemistry. Mm-hmm. And a good way to think about this is that a lot of people tend to think of DNA as sort of like at the root of your biochemistry or at the foundation, the final boss of that hierarchy. But if we look at DNA and look at what it's made of, DNA is made of nitrogen, 4 sugar molecules, and the essential element phosphorus. So even DNA is made of something. It's made of an essential element, you know.
And everything that manipulates DNA, everything that produces proteins, it's all mineral dependent.
Exactly.
This is one of the things that is so in the blind spot of the conventional medical community. They don't understand that just because blood mineral levels are not in the basement, the patient doesn't have overt copper deficiency or zinc deficiency. The body is a very big place. And having suboptimal levels of minerals is the difference between feeling and looking and performing at your best, in addition to other nutrients, obviously, and feeling like garbage, which is why so many people today, when they come to me, their chief frustration with the conventional medical system is often that they tell their doctor, I don't feel well. And their doctor says, I basically don't have anything for you other than pharmaceutical drugs that will make you feel up or down or some other variation on your current mood. And that, of course, have really horrific side effects. And so people are not happy with that answer, and they shouldn't be, because you don't have to settle for it. And that, you know, when we look for things like mineral imbalances, we find some pretty profound abnormalities that then allow us to help people understand not only what supplements to take, but what foods to eat, which is one of the other things I like about the hair tissue mineral balancing world or paradigm, is that we're not using 10, 20, 15 different supplements to get people well. There are plenty of people out there doing HTMAs who are doing that, but I don't think that that's the most artful, elegant, or proper approach. And part of what we're going to be doing with the course and the webinar series that we're producing, as well as some coaching that we're going to offer alongside it, is that we want you to understand how to actually do a lot of the mineral balancing through food, because it's possible. And we really don't need to be taking, you know, buckets and baskets full of supplements.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And I see that problem probably more often than the reverse, which is that people come to me typically and they're on like 20 to 30, sometimes even 50 different supplements. And there's, in the same way that drugs interact, all of the nutrients and the supplements that you're taking interact. Might not be as well known that that phenomena occurs, but it is occurring nonetheless. And so that's part of what we're doing with the hair test and the mineral balancing process, is to understand how those elements interact with each other, so that you can, you know, you don't have to take 50 different supplements. A lot of times I get people down to like 8 to 10 supplements maximum on our mineral balancing protocols. So that's kind of another huge benefit of the hair test, which is that we can basically pinpoint exactly what you need for a given period of time. But also, I think another really interesting point that you were hinting at is that when we do a hair test, because the mineral levels vary so much more in the tissues than in the blood, we can use it as a sort of predictive indicator of problems to come in the future, but also those subclinical problems that you're feeling now that the doctor cannot characterize or tell you what's going on.
Right. Absolutely. It makes it a great test for detecting issues before they become full-blown. Clark, thanks for joining me today. That's all the time I've got. It's good to see you.
Awesome.
If you've got questions, post them in the comments. We'll try and get to them another time when we do another one of these streams.
Thank you so much for having me, Doc.